Hey everybody, want to welcome you to the Mechanic Shop. If you are new to this channel, the first time that I ever made a video about this type of stuff was back in 2013. So I'm going to be referencing a lot of the videos that I've already talked about because right here I'm bringing them together. So if you don't quite understand, that's understandable because what I'm talking about is a combination of things that have happened over the years. And the reason I do this is because a long time ago I figured out that this whole thing is a storyline and it has to be foreshadowed years before it actually happens. So the things I talk about in this video, I've already talked a lot about it and I'm not going to go into huge details about it, but I just want to show you how I feel like it's all starting to come together with the storyline. Okay, so let me give you a quick rundown of what I've already talked about in other videos. And one of the biggest things is the female coming back into power. And that's been shown time and time again, especially lately through the Super Bowl halftime show. Now, mind you, the Super Bowl halftime show is a very symbolic ritual, and it shows you what the next chapter is going to be. It might be a couple of years down the road, it might be 5-10 years down the road, but it's all a storyline, so keep that in mind. The other thing I talked about briefly in another video was about the Americans show, showing how we're going to be taken over by the Russians. At the time when I was talking about it, I didn't know how, so that's going to be a part of this conversation. The other one I've talked about already is the 23rd of December. I couldn't quite figure out why they reference the number 23 a lot. I think it has a lot to do with the 23rd of December, which also would reference this Super Bowl and where it's being played. The other thing I talked about was how a long time ago, if we ever got into a nuclear war, if something nuclear happened, we would blame it on North Korea. Well, look at all the things that have been in the news lately, and I was talking about it years before we actually got into all this. Now remember, this is all about location, the teams playing, and symbolism. We got the Eagles and the Patriots literally playing tomorrow, and the Eagles represent the United States, and the Patriots represent the people who fought for it. So the question is, what is going to happen with this? What's going to be the symbolism in the halftime show, and what's going to just all come together at this event, and when is it going to come together? Now, a lot of people say, well, you don't know what's going to happen. How do you know that they're foreshadowing? Well, let me give you a few examples. Now, I want to start the storyline out with a person we know very well by the name of Trump. Now, to me, he is a distraction, and that's what he is he's put in place to just fuck everything up. And there's a reason for that because of the fact that he wants you to want government more. He's like the epitome of reverse psychology. He's fucking everything up so that you scream and shout, hey, I want government to control me, and the government always creates a problem and then gives you a solution, and that's what they're doing with old Trump. But this also goes a lot deeper because I think it's also showing that the female power is coming back into power. But I want to say this about him because right before the State of the Union, he literally said this. He said, I would love to be able to bring back our country into great form of unity without a major event where people pull together. That's hard to do, but I would like to do it without that major event because usually that major event is not a good thing. Now, mind you, the source is pbs.org. It's not just some random blog that somebody wrote. This is from a reliable, well-known source. So the question is, what major event is he talking about? Because I feel like he's pre-warning everybody that there's going to be a major event. And we know how our government loves to do false flags, and we've talked over the years about how we think a false flag would happen at the Super Bowl, and this is kind of my idea of why all these things tie together, and it's just a storyline, and I have got a few things right and I've got things wrong too, and I'm willing to admit when I get things wrong. But tell me, how is it that we've got a president here that just recently said these things, and he knows he's going to get caught up with the whole Russian investigation. So why would he say something like that? That's just food for thought, because if one does happen, then we'll know he knew beforehand. And when I say one, I mean a major event. And don't forget, Trump has been in a big battle with the NFL over something that didn't even have to do anything with the military or the flag or anything like that. So we've been shown the whole issue that Trump has with the NFL. So I kind of wonder what that part of the story is, or if it's referencing this whole Super Bowl this year. So let's get into the parts of why I do these videos. The reason I do these videos is because I believe almost everything that we're shown on TV, movies, news, etc. is a storyline that's being written by those who are in charge. There's a saying that those with the most money make the rules, or in this case, the storyline. And in this case, we're all the cast in the plot. But one big thing is that these people, for some reason, believe that they have to foreshadow events before they happen so that they can feel better about themselves after the fact. Also, so that they can show to those people who know what to look for what the next scene is going to be. Now, when I first started all of this, I didn't realize that the Super Bowl is one big symbolic ritual. I also didn't realize that they foreshadow different events years before they happen. So I'll use this as an example with the whole foreshadowing that's being shown to us. Back on February 1st, 2015, literally hours before the Super Bowl, I uploaded a video on how we were being shown fire and water, not only through media in general, but certain music videos. Katy Perry's Dark Horse video was one of them, and I also referenced ISIS because ISIS was a big thing back then, and I showed how they were referencing water and fire through the whole ISIS issue. Then, just a few hours after I posted my video during the halftime show, Katy Perry literally comes out in a fire suit and then ends up surrounded by water during the California Girls song, which California has been burning up this last year in 2017. The map you see now is California in 2017 alone. Now, I understand California is a big state, but that seems to be the state that's dominated the news last year with fires. And speaking of fires, those fires were super selective on what they burn up, which is really weird because Lockheed and Martin came out with their whole, hey, look at our lasers and look how we can shoot stuff down and you can't see it and we can burn things up. But, maybe that's just a coincidence. But something else I found interesting was that was the fire reference, but you really didn't hear about the water reference, which was up in Standing Rock. And some of us did hear about it, but they were up there fighting the oil companies from drilling and putting a pipe underneath the river, which feeds a lake. And this was something that not a lot of people heard of in the news because the news was crickets about this whole thing. And up in Standing Rock, their literal slogan was water is life. So you had the fires in California and you had the water is life up in Standing Rock. And they also had a nuclear drill not too far from Standing Rock, which was in Great Falls, Montana. My point is, it's all being told to us prior if we know what to look for, because these all can't just be coincidences, right? Now, the Katy Perry halftime show was just an example and had way more meaning to it, but I don't have time to get all into the details of that. Did I just get lucky on guessing about that? Maybe, but I'm pretty sure it was all pre-told through symbolism, etc. The more you look into this, the more you're going to understand the storyline. So let's move on to another part of the story. Now, I'm kind of going backwards here, so bear with me. Now, I want to look at the Beyonce halftime show. A lot of times I talk about the female coming back into power, and this is the part where they show us that. They start out with a fire that lights up the Geminis, the two sides, then they light up the larger version of a woman. Now, in my other videos when I talked about this, I talked about it being the representation of the female Anunnaki. And there's a lot deeper meaning to all that, but I don't have time to get into that either. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, what does this have to do with anything? Well, she was the one who did the halftime show right before the lights went out in the third quarter in the 2013 Super Bowl, which in the video that I did, I'd said something would happen in the third quarter. Also, she just happened to come out with a song called Nuclear right before the Super Bowl, where she sings about blowing it all away. Now, one thing we can add to this is the odd picture that was literally a blip on the screen between commercials a few days right before the Super Bowl was played. It was a picture of a stadium blown up. The question is, why was it just a quick blip in between commercials right before the Super Bowl? And why was it even shown to us? Now, once again, remember, things are shown years before they actually happen. So naturally, after seeing that, we automatically went to the worst scenario about the game being played in New Orleans and it being nuked. So I was wrong about that part, but I did get a part right. Now, in that Super Bowl, the lights went out in the third quarter. When this happened, I got a lot of texts from my friends asking me how I knew something was happening and how I knew it was in the third quarter. Maybe just a lucky guess. Now, mind you, I didn't get a lot of other things right, but that's because this was my first time ever trying to decode this storyline, and at that point, I didn't even know it was a storyline. Why the third quarter now? Now, mind you, my theory is because it's the time a ton of people are watching, and they would still be watching after that, and they would have seen the symbolic halftime show, which is the continuation of the storyline. During that time, when the lights went out, a picture came out looking up. The lights made a 7 on the left, and the goalpost on the right made an 11, with the Mercedes symbol number 3 in the middle. Now, 3 is also a symbolic number. It's called the creative child. And this is something that it's representing the creative storyline of what they're doing. Now, 7 is the number that is the seeker, the searcher for truth. And 11 is a master number. It's the most intuitive. And I don't have time to get into those. You can look them up on numerology.com, but it has a lot to do with this. The other weird thing is that half of the lights are still on, representing the light and the dark. So that's our foreshadowing for a few chapters ahead. Now, the next chapter is introducing Mr. Timberlake. He's going to be the halftime performer for the 2018 Super Bowl. Now, before we do that, let's go back another 14 years back to 2004 when him and Janet Jackson had the infamous wardrobe malfunction. Now, this to me is interesting because she was black, he was white, and he purposely took his hand and ripped off her top to show her covered nipple, which had a tassel on it. So it was something that was staged, I feel. And in that moment in time, that's when Justin embarrassed Janet, who was a black woman, in front of the world. And I'm pretty sure it was all staged, but he in turn also ruined her career by doing it while he continued up the ladder to stardom. This to me represents the white male humiliating a black female, and this is where Justin falls into the next part of our story. Once again, it goes back to the female coming back into power. Now let's just jump back to 2013 on the video that I showed you earlier with the blown up stadium, and I, for some odd reason, picked out Suit and Tie by Justin Timberlake. Now, the reason I'm referencing this video is because it came out in 2013 and had a lot of weird references in it that had nothing to do with suit and ties unless you're talking about those in charge. And the title of it was called The 2020 Experience. Now, this is something that represents black and white. In the video, it has trumpets. In another section, it says, "Sit back and watch the light show." It says, "All saints for my angels." Also, what's weird about it is "Get high out Vegas." Now, this goes back to the number 23, which to me represents money. And let's go over that real quick. Now, on December 23rd, the Federal Reserve Act was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson. Now, this to me is one of the biggest things that they've been kind of pointing to is the fall of the dollar or some type of representation of money. And I wasn't quite sure. And here, when he says "get high out Vegas," to me, it means to take out your money, get your money out while you can, because something's going to happen. Now, this has to do with this Super Bowl, and I'll tie it in here in just a few minutes. Now, here we are in 2018, 2 years before 2020, with a male, aka Trump, basically screwing everything up. And 2020 will be 7 years from 2013. Now, there's a lot of numerology in this, and I don't have time to explain it, but the numbers 7 and 11, once again, are coming into play. This is where I believe we see the female coming back into power in our government, and it will be a woman of color, more than likely a black woman, in 2020. So Justin Timberlake is a big representation. Now, don't forget, one of Justin Timberlake's songs that went to number 1 was "Can't Stop the Feeling." And that was for the movie Trolls back in 2016. Pretty sure he's going to sing that song, but it's also another reference to "Can't Stop the Feeling." what feelings are we talking about here? This next part leads me into the color blue. Now, if you watched any of my videos previous to this, I talk about how the color blue represents water and also the female. Now, you're probably saying, what does this have to do with it? Well, just recently, at the end of January, we had a super blue blood moon. Now, some people would say the blue blood represents the Jews or some other thing like that, which they have been called that. But at the same time, a super blue blood moon represents the female. The blue represents the female. The blood also represents the female. And the moon also represents the female energy. So when we come down to it, right before the Super Bowl, we have a super blue blood moon. And I just typed into DuckDuckGo, what does a super blue blood moon mean? And this is what came up. Well, in short, astronomy buffs, you've been waiting for this. It's the Super Bowl of the stars. So a super blue blood moon for astronomy buffs is literally the Super Bowl of the stars. Is that not weird that all this has happened right before all of this? So let's go ahead and put together what I've been talking about. So we've established that the Super Bowl is full of rituals and symbolism, and that's a lot of times what is being shown in the halftime. Also, who wins is another deal because I think it has a lot to do with the money and the betting in Vegas. If it's rigged, well, then there you go, because they know who the favorites are and they're rigging it in order for people to make the most money. Best case scenario here is that it's just all foreshadowing to the next chapter and nothing happens and we wait for the next part of the story to play out, knowing that a future part of the story has been foreshadowed. But let's go with kind of the worst case scenario. And let's see how all of this has possibly brought us to this point. And you would say, well, why are you going with worst case scenario? Well, because if you have one, you got to look at the other just in case, and you got to be prepared for it. And the only reason I'm really looking at it this year, and a lot of the reason I made this video for this Super Bowl this year, was because of what Trump said. And if you forgot what he just said right before the State of the Union, let me remind you. He said, I would love to be able to bring back our country into a great form of unity. Without a major event where people pull together, that's hard to do. But I would like to do it without that major event because usually that major event is not a good thing. Also, Unicorn Riot is down there and they're showing us Minneapolis unrolls the corporate red carpet and largest security op for Super Bowl 52. And they're showing us these Humvees and the National Guard being deployed into this area for the Super Bowl. Now, why do we have to have so much security anymore? I mean, it's super strange to me that we have to have this much security that we're calling out the National Guard. And the weird thing about it is it's been labeled a National Special Security Event, Tier 1 by the Department of Homeland Security. The designation of Super Bowl as a Tier 1 means that it is a similar event, not of the same magnitude or significance as an NSSE, but involving the lead interagency effort of DHS, USSS, and the FBI. The scale and scope of these events require high significant coordination among federal, state, and local authorities and warrants pre-deployment of federal assets as well as consultation, technical advice, and support to specific functional areas in which the state and local agencies may lack expertise or key resources. Is the Super Bowl that important that they're deploying the National Guard? I mean, that's why we're looking at this going, what is the significance and what would be the worst scenario? So let's keep going. Let's start with December 23rd, when we had all of our money signed over by Woodrow Wilson to the Federal Reserve, which is a private institution. In a sense, he gave all of our power away to a private institution. Now, the 2018 Super Bowl is being played at the brand new state-of-the-art U.S. Bank Arena. This is the reference to money, but also currently has protesters outside of it demanding that the U.S. Bank divest from oil and other fossil fuels. This movement pretty much caught fire during the Standing Rock protest up in North Dakota, which was spearheaded by the natives up there, which brings us back to the water is life reference, aka the female. Also, if anything was to happen at the stadium, it would represent the fall of the dollar. Next is the 7-Eleven reference. And strangely enough, a block away from the stadium is the intersection of 7th and 11th. And a lot of people could say, well, it's a block away. So how does that reference anything? Well, it could be that intersection of the picture we saw, 7-Eleven. And the 6 represents the human aspect of it, which is in between that in the stadium. So here's another reference that I think might be pertinent to the 7-Eleven is because Super Bowl 52, if you take the numbers and put them together in numerology, 5 and 2 equals 7. Now, if I take the Roman numerals that were shown, which is LII, that's 52. Also could be short for lie, because as in the other videos, I talk about how they take things and they combine them, or they switch them around and reverse them, or they'll drop letters in order to show you what they want to show you. So with this, we have LII. Well, if you take the number 5-2, it's 7, and if you put it where the L would go, it would be 7-1-1 or 7-Eleven. Now, is that a long shot? Maybe, but that's kind of how I see things, because that's the way they do things. Everything has symbolism and code to it. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at 52 and saying, okay, that's 7. And if I take the Roman numerals, I go ahead and throw the 7 in front of the 2 I's, then that means that it's 7-Eleven. And if you really want to get weird with this, ICE, which is the immigration enforcement people, yeah, they just recently started targeting 7-Elevens with their immigration crackdown, which has been in the news just as of recent. So that's something that I found interesting, because that was a big deal. They were going into 7-Elevens in order to do that. One strange thing that I noticed is that if we look at the hospital, it's right next to the stadium, just like in the movie Sum of All Fears, where the hospital was also hit. But right before the stadium blows up, we see an aerial view that shows us a stadium that, if we flip the picture around, is also by a body of water, just like the U.S. Stadium Bank. So we know in the movie that a hospital and a body of water are right next to the stadium, which happens to be very similar here. Even the roads around the stadium look very similar. I looked up which stadium they were using to do the filming, and it said they used Montreal Stadium. But when you look at Montreal Stadium, it doesn't look anything like that. Also, the open stadium is a representation of possibly the opposite of being a closed stadium. Another representation with this is the Eagles and the Patriots are playing in the Super Bowl. Now, these two teams that are playing are also huge representations of the U.S. And if anything ever happened, then that would be a representation of the U.S. falling. So earlier I talked about Great Falls, Montana, and where they did the nuclear drill up there. Why would they choose Great Falls, Montana to do a nuclear drill? The other thing is if that was going to happen, let's say a nuclear bomb did go off at the stadium, who would we blame? Well, a few years ago, I talked about us blaming North Korea a long time ago, because of the fact that that was something that they were kind of going, oh, North Korea is developing nukes, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, if anything ever happened, we'd blame North Korea. And North Korea, just in the last year, has dominated the news cycle, and Trump has been in a pissing contest with North Korea about how big his button is. So therefore, if anything ever happened at something like this, and an event like this that caused major chaos and major loss of life, then we would blame it on North Korea, so we could go to war with North Korea and justify our normal way of doing things, which is going to other countries off of a lie, which would be LII. And we all know the U.S. is great for making up false wars and going into other people's lands and stealing their resources. And the only reason you're here is because this is stolen land, because the Puritans came over, they stole it from the Native Americans who were here first, and here we are. Years later, between the genocide and everything else of the Native people, here we're standing on what we call America now. And so our history is pretty shitty about doing things like this. So this doesn't surprise me if it would happen and they blamed it on North Korea. The other bad part about this is the fallout from up there would come down, and according to this map, it shows the jet stream, and it would come through the Midwest, hit Texas, and wrap its way around the center part of the United States. Also, some of it would move out west. And that's the shitty part about this is if that did happen up there, the fallout would cover a very large area. So for shits and giggles, what I did was I went to nuclearsecrecy.com and I looked up the map that they have. It's nuclearsecrecy.com/nuke map. And you can go anywhere on the world and put a pin in, and then you can see what the blast of a nuclear weapon would do and the radius, etc., etc. So what I did was I went to the site, I entered Minneapolis, and I also entered the number 2 option of the North Korean weapon tested in 2017, which is apparently an option on the site. But once you hit that, you see the effects of what it would do, something that big. And unfortunately, it would cover a very large area. But with everything that might happen, let's just hope it doesn't. But those are just some things I'm seeing, and let's hope that absolutely nothing happens. I'm okay with being wrong about stuff, but at the same time, I still think it's a storyline being told, and who knows, maybe the Eagles win and they will go ahead and take that Super Bowl ring home. Honestly, I don't really care either way because my team's not even in the fight. But the one thing I want you guys to remember is Trump made that statement about not wanting to have a major event happen in order to bring us together, which is really weird and really eerie because I feel like he's foreshadowing for something to happen. Now, there's a lot of things in life, and I just see it as a story, and I like to look for clues and different things, and sometimes I put them together and I get it right, sometimes I don't. But like I said, let's hope that the extreme side of this doesn't happen, because if it doesn't, all the better. You know, people go on with their lives, and hopefully we can learn as human beings that we all are on the same planet. Even though we have our differences, we need to work together in order to fix this shit. But unfortunately, at the same time, there's always going to be light and there's always going to be dark. And there's always going to be people trying to fuck shit up, just because that's just who they are. But on the other hand, there's always us who try to make things better, and we try to show people the truth about things. Even if we're wrong, at least we admit we're wrong and we try to find a way to better ourselves. All right, hope you guys are having a great night. Thanks for watching The Mechanic Shop. Talk to you later.